really starting to feel the effects of that. So today, me and Jesus want to be really mindful of your time. We're going to go through a couple scenarios. This is meeting check-in 3. We're going to go through a couple scenarios. We're going to recap kind of what we've been doing. We're going to look a little bit at section 3, which really starts talking about the syllabus. And we're going to try to get that all done in about an hour so that we can let you spend the hour after actually working on the syllabus piece. We're going to try to give you that time back to do some of the work. It's been a somewhat frustrating process for me and Jesus because so much of this is supposed to be really interactive. So we're going to attempt to maybe make this one a little bit more interactive. We'll see how we do. But, you know, it really is meant to work together. So we have some good reflective questions for this time around. So if no one has any questions, Jesus is going to start us out. Okay. Jesus, do you want me to give you...
I believe I am a co-host already,
Perfect.
so I shouldn't have any problems at this point. Just to double check, is everyone should have my PowerPoint presentation on their screen, is that correct?
Yep.
And just to make sure, it's not the one with the notes on it, right? It's the actual presentation.
Yep, number 3.
Got it. Okay, yeah, because sometimes I make that mistake. Okay, everyone. Well, let me just show you the agenda for today. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. We are going to talk about the following topics. Cassandra already mentioned we are interested in making this a shorter meeting, but at the same time, provide you with good information. I do want to ask you a couple of questions. I'm going to put that into the important information section. Just want to get a better understanding of how do you feel, how we all feel in relationship with this project so far. Then I'm going to provide you an example of how can you use the data that we have provided so far. Then after that, we're going to jump to, I'm going to provide you some information about some support meetings that we will be having or hosting the next week. So I'll give you some details about that. Then Cassandra is going to take you through the section number 3, which is about the course materials. And then we will finish the session with Q&A. Remember, we start with the group questions first, and then we can start taking care of any individual question that you might have. So just a couple of questions that I wanted to know, especially because sometimes it is a little bit hard to really get a sense of how is people feeling or what is the level of engagement that people have in this kind of environment. Usually when you have people like in one classroom, like we used to have during the first meeting or the first and the second meeting, I think it was, to some level, you or we were able to assess how you guys were feeling about different things, how you were reacting to the different contents or to the different pieces of information that we were providing to you. But now with Zoom and all of this, it's a little bit hard. I think we need to get used to understanding this. For me particularly, it's a little bit challenging just because I really like to try to interpret the body language of people. And for me, when I am in a classroom, I think I can understand how people are feeling. But in this kind of environment, well, that is very, very hard. So just because of that, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions just to get a good sense of how do you feel. So the first question that I wanted to ask you, just to get how are we doing in terms of data? So I wanted to ask to the group, so far, can you tell to me what data have you received from us?
Well, the data you showed at the last meetings we've had.
Got it. Okay. And if I were to ask you what's that data, like what's that data about, what would you tell me?
It's all head count, retention, persistence data related to different courses that we teach over several semesters.
Yeah, and the data seem to have a hard time linking courses correctly as far as links and outcomes because of how we run our program where it cycles. The data had some stuff where it really wasn't showing a class. It was showing CRNs, which are a snapshot of a class or part of the class. The other thing I noticed is our retention data and our success data are exactly the same, which they're not. And I know that from looking at my stuff. So I actually relied a lot on the data I had from my previous Canvas shells and grade books to answer a lot of the questions. It was more accurate than some of the data that I got from the stuff you guys mined. as far as it actually relating to the class and trends with students.
The retention and the success rate being the same thing, it was very obvious and with my colleague in our same area that when we worked together to answer questions and did things together in the questions that we were supposed to, it became very evident that we really had a serious disconnect in how we were really supposed to grade and mark people's attendance, because it's not your fault that that information is the same. It's how we were reporting. And so that became a really clear thing that happened. We could see that, oh, we need to make sure that we're on the same page with grading and how we report.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for sharing that. Just wanted to get a good understanding. How do you feel about the data? Because to a point, we were having a discussion like about this, Cassandra and I, the other day, and I think one of the concerns that we had was that we are just throwing, maybe we could even say dumping a lot of data on you, and that doesn't mean that we are really helping you out to understand that data. So we really wanted to understand from your point of view, how do you, what are your thoughts regarding the information that we have shared with you so far? So that actually takes me to
Jesus, this is Ingrid. I'd like to make a contribution and talk about the data overall. So even though I've been teaching online for 4 years, and that was the data I analyzed, I found the data very helpful because I realized that one of the goals of our course is not only to teach English, but to help students achieve a program certificate. And I realized there was really only one barrier for my online students, and it was the CASAS multiple choice standardized reading assessment. It was hard for my students to travel to campus to take that reading assessment. And so I made a note, well, there's got to be new ways for students to do the reading assessment. And it's like you ask and your answer will be delivered. So yesterday I learned in our ESL meeting that they're no longer using the CASAS reading standardized tests, and we get to select a reading test that will substitute for the CASAS test. And it's not that I'm going to go out and find an easy reading test, but I'm going to find some kind of a reading assessment that will be available to all the online students so they don't have to go to campus. And because trying to make the physical drive or take the bus from home to campus and to show up on campus when the office was open was huge hurdles to my students. So I actually think now that we're working predominantly online and they waive the CASAS requirement, we're actually going to see a lot more program completions in ESL. And we, as ESL professors, though, we have the task of finding a strong reading assessment that, will be kind of set the bar high. But at least it'll be online and we won't have to do that. So just manipulating the data and observing it and analyzing it really helped me see that path super clearly, which even though it was kind of in the back of my mind before, this process of analysis has really helped me see, okay, here's a gap, here's a challenge, how are we going to resolve that?
Thank you. I really appreciate you sharing that. And actually, I'm going to try to provide you one example today that kind of does that, kind of is an example where I'm going to be analyzing the data, fake data, dummy data that I put together so that I can illustrate this example. And then from that, jump into specific things that we would need to change in our classroom. So that is going to be kind of like related to the thing that you just mentioned. So I think it was very good that you somehow already started that conversation. So we'll get to continue talking a little more about that. And I really appreciate that everyone is really, trying to understand how to use to get the best of the data that we provided. And we totally understand that for some of you, the data is working very well. For other ones, it might not be the best. You might have to go and look at your own internal data, and that is totally valid. I remember the online form allows you to use the data from whatever you want to use. You can also, it's open-ended questions the questionnaire, the online form has open-ended questions just because they know that there was not going to be straight answers, or that not all people were going to be in the same place. So it's very good whenever you can just pull data from other places where you think there's more data or more detailed data or just any other kind of data, go for it, and that's just going to make your online form better. I'm going to jump to the next question, and I just want to know, like, how do you feel about this project to this point? And it's not that I want to bias your answer, but I am interested in knowing if at this point you feel like happy, sad, overwhelmed, excited, maybe disappointed, like, or what are the feelings that you have at this point of the project? Whenever you think about this project, what are the feelings that come to mind?
Hey, Jesus, I think Leah has a question.
No, I was going to comment. Yeah, I for one thing think that you've explained data really well. You know that you are very helpful in helping in me, at least for me, because I'm not a big data person, you know. So you're slow, you know, you're careful and you're very supportive, and I appreciate that a lot, because it's not something I naturally want to spend much time thinking about, really, quite frankly, you know. So I really appreciate that. And I wondered also, are you all, if we're entering all of our things in that online form, are you able to review it and you would let us know if we're not doing something correctly, right? Is that?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, and actually that is one of the promises that I made during the last meeting. However, we haven't had the time to really go to your forms. I already did one review, but I did want to do a little more and maybe just try to get back to you and provide you some feedback. So what I am trying to do is use the meetings that I will talk to you about in a little bit. I want to use those 30 minutes to also review together all the content that you have put so far in the online form. So that's part of the objectives that we want to accomplish by having this one-on-one meetings the next week. But I'll give you more details about that, and I'm happy to hear that you feel okay with, you know, with the explanation that we have provided so far.
Thank you.
I have a question on the form. I got to section 4 and it wants us to track our assignments to attrition. And I emailed Cassandra asking, is there a way in the form for me to, because I have multiple assignments a week. So should I just track the major assignment? I already know where my drop-offs are, and I know that from my data. But if I need to put in all the assignments, there's not enough room, because I have multiple graded assignments every week with my students.
So I apologize if I didn't see your email, Brian. Something's going on with my emails. It seems like I'm not getting all of them, and then they might just be getting lost in the 200 emails a day. So I apologize if I didn't get back to you. To answer your question on section 4, though, there is a portion where you can put in your assignments, and we would just be looking at one class, so it wouldn't be for all classes. But then when you talk about the drop-off, which for the student piece, that's something that we're trying to still determine if we can pull it through ISIS and how we would do that, because we would actually help you put in those numbers and give you what they are on the continuing education side, but we're still trying to determine how we can do that.
Right, and it's not going to be accurate for me on the continuing education site through ISIS, because, you know, I look at participation, which is different than drop. So I can look through my weekly attendance and see where I have students stop participating. But, you know, with CE, are they just gone for a week and coming back? Are they gone a couple of days? You reach out. You know, we don't instantly drop them as soon as they stop showing. So when they leave ISIS is going to be a slight delay from when they actually stop participating. So since I track attendance much closer than that, I can see when they stop participating, because I track attendance every week by hour. So I can see exactly after, and I know it's my midterm, and that's why I'm going to divide that into 5 tests instead of 3 tests. I'm going to change my test structure, because that's even students that pass the midterm and are getting to be in class. It's like the midterm, like they think the class is over, or it psychs them out or something, because it's the first real comprehensive test they do. And I've had a drop off every time with that. So I have the data and my stuff showing that trend, but where it asks for the assignments is just linear. I didn't want to put 10 assignments in each week. It should have a drop-down menu where you could add assignments so you can graph it out better. And I didn't see where the form allowed me to do that. So I didn't know if you just want me to put in major assignments and not the minor ones, or what? Because
So-
like I said, we have multiple assignments every week.
Yeah, why don't we talk about it in the one-on-one meetings next
Okay.
week? But we do want to try to look at the ACS and look at those trends, even though you might have your own information. We're trying to like look at the trends. So I appreciate that you document it so closely. We definitely would want to align it with what continuing education has in numbers as well.
Sure,
But
'cause,
Jesus
yeah,
is
we'll
gonna,
see it in ACS.
yeah, and
Yeah.
that's how we were going to align it, is by the weekly ACS.
Okay.
But we have to figure out if we can actually do that, and that's the piece I'm still working on.
Okay.
All right. Okay. The next question that I have for you is, you know, given all the feelings that you might have at this point, given the level of confidence that you have about the project at this point, given all the things that are happening right now, is what are the implications of this? Meaning, what are the implications of the fact that you're dealing with a lot of things right now? What are the implications of maybe you feel anxious about getting all this data? I'm trying to understand a little more from you.
We may have lost Jesus.
You think?
Oh,
You need to buy more.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Out of band.
Okay, he's back, guys.
All right, sorry about that. I don't know. For some reason, that happens to me. It every day it happens to me, but only once. You know, once per day. I really don't understand what's really happened. Hold on. Let me just put the. Okay. Can you see my presentation again?
No.
No, not yet.
You're
No?
not screen sharing.
Oh yeah, I'm not sharing my screen. That's why. Okay, I'm gonna get this. All right. How about now?
Yes, we can see it now.
All right, perfect. Hold on. Okay, sorry about that. Let me just rephrase my last question. I was asking, given the circumstances, given all the feelings that you might have, given all the data that we have provided to you so far, how do you feel? Yeah, how do you feel? What would be, not really how do you feel, it's more, what are the implications of all the things that are happening right now in terms or regarding how is your project gonna look at the end? Like, if I were to ask you at this point, how do you see your end product at this point? Do you think it's better than what you expected originally? Maybe not as good as you thought. Maybe it's just the same. You're still, you know, trying to get to the same place.
Well, I think it's really interesting because now for a department that has never had online, and now planning going forward what this project is going to look like is definitely a good thing, because we're at a point where we could instigate and begin lots of things that we're learning in this, but yet it's also, wow, I talk so much about the face-to-face experience and the hands-on in the classroom, how it's just another level of anxiety to make sure that now my project going forward incorporates something that I don't have experience with.
And Shirley, if you could remind me, what department are you in again?
Clothing and textiles.
Okay, that's what I thought, but I didn't want to assume I remembered correctly.
And I think too, Jesus, people are still, my guess is, I could be wrong, I don't want to speak for the group, but they're still kind of going through the data to really
Right.
figure out, you know, where is there, it sounds like, Brian, you may have landed on some certain things that you find very curious, but I think there's still, not everyone may have a project in mind. They may still be kind of looking through everything and hopefully and still trying to figure out what's most curious to them and where's the biggest gap.
Well, I think in general, it's hard to feel connected to anything right now. Right now, I mean, I was getting so much of it when, you know, I was in the room and with people. Now it all feels a little, you know, like there's a buffer between everything. So that's hard just in general, right? So not just because of this project, but I'm disappointed that we can't, you know, sit down and discuss it robustly.
Got it. Okay. Well, thank you very much for sharing that. My last question for you guys is, what are good examples of ways in which we could support you? Are there any other things that maybe you are, okay, maybe if they do this or that, it would be helpful for us?
Good ways.
I'm not sure if any of you have had the chance to go to the Canvas shell. We're still learning how to use it, but we're trying to make things be organized, and I'm trying to apply very good feedback that Ingrid provided to me, very good information. So I'll be trying to apply all those tips that she provided, but I don't know if anyone has had the chance to look at it.
Looked at it briefly when you first put it up.
Okay. So as I mentioned before, we are gonna try to just, instead of sending you so many emails, we're gonna try to just put the content on the Canvas shell, because we get how hard it is to really find the particular email that Jesus sent like 4 weeks ago, especially because from time to time the email is going to be down, and then some days for some reason you're not able to use the search function. There's a lot of things that are going on in the email, so it's better to just try to use the Canvas shell. Okay, well, those were my questions. Just wanted to get a better sense of how are we all doing in terms of this. Again, it's a little bit complex to understand where are we at this point, given that we're connecting only through Zoom. But I think it's just a matter of understanding, learning how to do this. So just like Shirley said, maybe at the beginning we had different, we had a different focus, but now with all the things that are happening, we are, now having to consider more things in this particular kind of project. So all of that being said, let me just switch gears. Let me just jump to another. I'm going to provide to you one example. I want to show you a quick example about how I would analyze the data that we have shared for you so far. I do want to point out something. The data that I'm going to be showing to you is all dummy data. I changed the data in a way that it was going to be more dramatic. So I am completely aware that maybe the data that you have is not going to be as juicy, to say something, as the one that I'm going to be showing to you. But I think even if your data is just pretty gray or pretty straightforward, or it always looks the same, I think even if that is the case, it is still it is worth the effort to analyze it. Another thing that I want to mention is, if my face goes to a different direction, it's not because I'm not paying attention to you, it's just because I have two screens, so the webcam is something, it might look a lot like I'm not really paying attention, but I am. Okay. So my example, in this example is going to be, I'm going to be a faculty member. My name is Jesus Rivas, you all know that. I am working, or I am teaching classes for the institutional research program. In my particular course, the one that I selected is the course name is Statistics 101. Okay, what I'm showing to you is one of the data sheets that we received. This is a success data sheet, and you can tell that by the color. Remember, orange is for success, green is for retention, blue is for headcount. The first thing that I think when I got this data, or when I got this report, the first thing that comes to mind was, wow, this is a lot of data. This is a lot of data. So let's start from the beginning, which is how the data sheet works, okay? So the first thing that I want to point out is that the content that I highlighted right now, those are the demographics groups that we are analyzing for, with our data. The legend or the information that we have at the top is just referencing or making reference to the term that we are talking about, meaning that the data that you have on screen, it belongs to Fall 18. The headers, that's just the data that we're providing to you. Remember, we provided to you different kinds of data. The first column, or the first group of columns, they provide information for one specific CRN. In this case, is my CRN for Fall 18 H17BD. That was just one CRN that I had. Then the second group of columns is course data, which means that all the classes for Statistics 101 that were offered for Fall 18, regardless of the faculty member, all those are combined into the second set of columns. Okay, so that was just so that you can have a little more data, especially for the people that their classrooms or their classes, they don't have that many students. So it's always good to have a little more reference. Okay, the columns that I'm highlighting right now, they belong to the total number of students that were enrolled in my class and also in the combination of everyone's classes. So you can see how I have, for my particular class, I had 70 students enrolled. And for example, if I look down, I can see how I had 40 female students enrolled, which represented 57% of my total class. On the other column, that is the same, but for all the classes combined. So in total, there were 450 students enrolled in the Statistics 101 classes, and say 44 students were African American students, which represented 10% of the total number of students enrolled. The other columns that I'm highlighting now, those are the actual success rate numbers. Remember, success relates to the number of students that were able to complete my class successfully. In this case, for this particular project, we are calling success or successful students, we're calling that to students that were able to get an A, B, C, or D. There's a big discussion going on regarding if D should have been included, but for the purposes of the Faculty Institute, we included that one. But that's why I'm telling you the definition is just for this institute. There's still some discussions that need to happen to come up with the right definition for for San Diego continuing education in general. Also, if you belong to ESL or child development, the success rate, most likely there are no grades in your class. So instead of A, B, C, D, it would be just the fact that you got a course completion award at the end of the course. So this is just telling me, for example, back to my class, out of 70 students that I had enrolled, 46 were able to get an A, B, C, or D, which means 66% of my students were able to, be successful in my class. Let me jump to the next one. All right. Now that I understand how this works, now that I understand how is my data sheet working, I do want to point out that not just because you have tons and tons of data, that doesn't mean that you have to use all the data. You need to start from one place. So the place where I want to start from is from the very, very top. So what I want you to do now is I want you to focus only on the highlighted things. Forget about all the other numbers and just put attention to the things that are inside of the squares. That being said, I would like you to tell me what is that you see right now in the slide.
The success rate for the CRN and the success rate for the course in general.
Okay. What does the data? What does the data is telling us right now?
Well, the students in this CRN did not do as well overall or complete or were as successful as the one in the course.
Correct. All right. Well, that is correct. So what I see is that my success rates, the success rates for my class, are lower than the ones for all the sections combined. My students for this class are not performing as well as students from other classes, from other faculty members, or from other classes that I could even be teaching, not this particular one. Because of that, again, there's many ways to do this, but because of that, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to look only at my results now, trying to understand if this is happening across all my demographics groups, or if there are any particular groups that are pulling my numbers down. Okay, what do you see now?
Jesus, could you make it bigger, or is that not possible?
No, I don't think it is possible.
Okay.
Well, Jesus, I would say in general, you do not do as well with the Latino student population as you do with others.
Yeah.
There's a big difference between you and then the course overall, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay, correct. What else do you see?
Oh, geez, Philippine. Yeah. Okay. Your age group, you don't.
Yeah, but Filipino's not statistically accurate. You're talking one student, so the percentage is not an accurate percentage. There's not enough data to actually validate the percentage.
Correct. So, Brian, you mean to the fact that there's only one Filipino student, right?
Exactly. So if there's only one, it's like we administer state tests. Well, the state test has a 0% pass rate. Well, because in the last quarter, only one person took the test and they didn't pass it. So does that mean the test is too hard, or not enough people took it to be statistically valid? And we do that with a lot of the measurements of smog for professional licensing audit, that if you don't do enough data, the data doesn't count because it's not statistically accurate.
Yeah, and actually, I can tell you there's a lot of discussion between the institutional research offices about this particular topic. Whenever we're putting student equity reports together, there's a lot of different ways to say, okay, when is something too much? So there's a lot of discussion about that particular topic. So what I see in this particular table is what you both mentioned. On one side, I see that, for example, Asian students, Filipino students, yeah, the percentages are very low, but we are talking about only 3 and 1 student. So it is very hard for me to really tell if something is going on. Now, on the other side, for Latino students, yeah, maybe the base, there's also not a lot of students, but at least I have a little more students. I have 23 students and only 10 were successful. So I think I have a little more confidence that at least I can talk about Latino students for this particular one. So,
well, absolutely, and they're a much bigger part of your class percentage-wise of the 70. So if that data is lower than the class data, then that student population is outlier, because you have because what are they? Almost a third of your class.
Correct.
So they're a big enough percentage of the whole to validate the data.
So in this case, one thing that I could think, okay, it seems to me that my Latino students are the ones that are pulling down my numbers. They're moving my numbers down, but I also see that my younger students, the one from the age group 20 to 24, and actually some people are mentioning that in the chat, people with 20 to 24 years, they are also underperforming, and they are also 27 students. So I'm going to take a leap and say, okay, I'm going to talk about those 2 particular groups. Now, so at this point, what I want to do is I want to focus on these 2 groups, Latino students and younger students. I'm going to look at the same group in the other column to understand if there's something happening in the other classes, or if it's just something that is happening in my class.
Well, the other question I would have is, are your younger students Latino? Is it the same group, and that you don't have that data from this spreadsheet? Because that's what we talked about earlier, about combining different things to see what the outline. So is this a Latino problem or an age problem that just happens to be Latino?
All right, Brian, I'm totally sure that you would be one of the A students in this analysis. It's like you were with me when I was putting together this exercise. We are going to get to the thing that you're mentioning. Okay, but for now, we're going to think that these are, we're not going to try to combine them. We're just going to think about Latino, and we're going to think about younger students. So I have interest in these 2 groups, okay? So now that I isolated in the next boxes that I have, what I'm doing is that I'm paying just attention to my 2 groups, Latino students and younger students. So what do you see?
That they're underperforming by the course average.
Okay. What caught my attention when I look at this data was the fact that Latino students are underperforming in my class, but they are not underperforming at the course level. The same goes for younger students. They're underperforming in my class, but not at the, in the other classes with other faculty. So for me, this means that more likely than not, whatever that is going wrong in here, it has maybe to do something, with something that I'm doing. So maybe if things were the other way around, say that also course data, you know how we have, and let me try to get it, let me see if I can put a pointer. Can you see my mouse, my pointer? Okay. So right now I have 43% and I have 92%, right? So I'm like, okay, whatever is going on here, it seems like it's related to me. If I had a similar percentage in here, say a 45% or 50%, and also here something like 40% or 42%, what I would be thinking is, hey, you know what? This is more of an structural problem. It's some sort of a structural problem. Maybe all the faculty that are teaching classes or teaching this particular class, we're not getting something. Somehow we're not engaging with this particular kind of groups, right? So that's another scenario. But for this particular one, we're going to say, no, it seems like at the general level, they are doing well. It's just in my class where they are not doing very well.
But
And-
that could also be a scheduling issue based on maybe your class is a Saturday class, the other ones are during the week, or maybe it's a night class. So I think that, you know, to overlay that, and obviously if you know your department, you know when the other classes of your section are taught, because that could also be an issue that's completely unrelated to the instructor, but more of an institutional issue of certain students do better at certain times or certain, you know, things. Like I know in auto, our nighttime students struggle a lot more than our daytime students, and that's typical of our nighttime students across our program in every class. So I can't say it's one instructor when it was institutional, our nighttime program. So we did things in our nighttime program to change that, and we implemented those things because we realized it's a night program, not an instructor program. I mean,
Brian, I have a question on that, because if that would be the case, wouldn't all the numbers be down for the night program
yeah,
versus a subset?
Right, exactly. But we're not breaking that out here by default. In auto, it's easy because we only teach 2 sections of the same class. So you have the one I'm teaching, you have the night. We can look at that with the other ones, the 507 and the other stuff. And we tracked it in our program review. So we've already looked at that data. And that's why we actually restructured our night program to create better student retention. And it seems to be working. Of course, moving off campus has made it more of a struggle. But we really totally revamped our night program to deal with the retention issue.
Yeah, but that could also just be confounded. Like it could be outside factors, right? Like
exactly,
they have
there's a reason why they're going to school at night.
Right. So why do they self-select tonight? You know, who are those people? You know what I mean? Like
absolutely.
There's so many confounding factors.
So my key takeaway from this is the fact, and I believe that's kind of part of the spirit of the Faculty Institute, is the fact that when someone from research looks at this, looks at this data, we might not have as good insight as the one that you have. Obviously, there's still some confirmatory analysis that would have to be done, or more analysis, or discussion about it. But it is obvious that when I look at this data, I may just have 1 or 2 ideas about what's going on, whereas when you guys look at the data, since you are the subject matter expert, you have like 100 ideas. And out of those 100, even without having to look at more data, you can automatically start saying, well, out of those 100 ideas, I know these 75 do not make sense because this. So that is, for me personally, that is kind of the beauty when we have people like subject matter experts look at the data. So I really like when you guys, tell me all these examples, because that is the spirit of this Faculty Institute. So thank you for sharing that. Now, going back to the example, so one thing that we have here is that these 2 groups are underperforming in my class, but they are not underperforming in the other classes, right? But as we, one thing that you mentioned before, Brian mentioned this is, okay, what about if this class is my weekend class? This is my Saturday class. Maybe this is just something random. Maybe this is something that just happened this particular term. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to take a look at a different data sheet. I have another data sheet for the same class, for Statistics 101, but this data sheet is for spring 19. Okay, so I'm like, okay, let's see if this was, maybe just was one random thing going on. So when I look at my new data sheet, what do you see?
Similar trends.
Similar, yeah.
Okay, so it seems that we have the same issue, right? But it's just 2 classes. I mean, could just be some random things on it. Maybe it's not enough evidence. Maybe I just don't feel enough, I'm not confident enough. However, the problem that I have in here is that Jesus only provided me with 2 data sheets. He did not give me a lot of data sheets. So how can I continue the analysis if I don't have any other data sheets? Or maybe he gave me more data sheets, but they don't really work. So what I'm going to have to do now is that I'm going to have to jump to the spreadsheet. Okay? So I'm going to jump to the spreadsheet to continue my analysis. Now, as you all remember, the spreadsheets, they have a lot of data. Okay? There's tons of data in the spreadsheet. But just because there's a lot of data doesn't mean that you need to use all of it. Because if you try to do that, you are never going to end. You're just going to continue looking at more things and more and more and more and more. So the way that I'm going to be using my spreadsheet, which is not the only way to use it, is I'm going to focus on what I already identify in my data sheet, which is problems with Latino students and problems with younger students. So I'm going to probably you remember, but you should remember this, but there are some filters that you can apply in the data in the spreadsheet. So what I'm doing here is that I'm applying a filter to get only Latino students. And I am also asking the system to provide me the data for my particular section, but also the sections or the classes for Statistics 101 from other faculty members. So when I do that, I get this chart. So I want you to tell me what is that you see in the chart.
Mm.
We see the chart. We see that the trend changed. You were very close, and then something happened the last two where you started to deviate radically from the average.
Correct. Okay.
So what did you change in your curriculum, your schedule, your load? What did you change, if anything? Was the time of the class changed? Are you now teaching a different day? What happened?
Correct. That is part of the question that you would be asking yourself. You would be wondering, okay, something happened because before I was not having this issue. I was not struggling with this particular demographic. So what could have happened? But let's say, for the sake of my example, that we hit that wall. We have no idea what could have happened, or we don't have any more data. We don't have idea. Okay, we don't have any idea. So this happens sometimes. Sometimes you don't know what could have happened. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to stop looking at this particular group. I'm going to say, okay, for now, I'm done with Latino students. I don't get it. I'm going to have to come back. I'm going to put a pin on it, and then I'll come back. So far, probably what I have done is, even though I don't know what's going on with the Latino students, I would have gone to my online form and just fill in all the content, all the findings that I have made so far. And, the online form doesn't require you to explain all the things. If you don't know the answer to questions, that's perfectly fine. So I would just go and build my narrative. Okay, so there's that. I'm going to jump to the next one. So what I'm doing now is that I'm using the filters to get only students from the age group 20 to 24. So I do that, and I get this. So what is that you see?
You were never very good with the youngsters, Jesus.
You repeat that?
I said you were never all that great with the youngsters. I mean, your data is not as aligned, and is it, with the Latino students, this one's clearly, you've got a gap, right? Across the board. Maybe fall 17, you did something special. You brought donuts every Friday or something, or went up a little bit, but in general, you're still struggling. Interesting. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is correct, because unlike with the Latino students, this is a problem that has been here for a while. So now that I identified that, I want to brainstorm a little. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, okay? Or I'm just going to tell you the kind of questions that I would be making to myself as a faculty member. Probably the first question that I would have is, how come I didn't realize about this before? Just looking at the chart, it seems like I have been having this problem for a while. So how come is that I was not aware of this? Any thoughts?
Most common thing is you just blame the students that there's something wrong with them, and that's why they're leaving.
All right, that's very valid.
I mean, that's the most common thing when you talk to instructors. Yeah, kids today, they just won't work. They won't do this stuff. These millennials, right? Isn't that what we hear?
And maybe you say that in your class about millennials, and they immediately get turned off, right? Who knows?
Yep.
Maybe it looks too like you at the earlier semesters you had fewer, and then when you start to get more of them, you seem to be having more difficulty.
All right. So this is, and I made all this up, but let's pretend again I was a faculty member, and I'm very bummed, I'm very sad because of this. Okay, how come I didn't know this before? But then suddenly I realized about something. I see that before I didn't have that many students in that age group. So I have been always had issues with this particular age group, but in the past I was not aware of this, or my numbers were not being dragged down because I didn't have that many young students. But lately, I have more students like that. So now that I have more students, and since I am not really connecting with them, my numbers are going down for the total group. Okay, so that's just my explanation that I made up. And my next question, given that okay, now I feel a little better because I didn't have that many students in the past. I mean, this is a place where we can make mistakes. That I believe that's kind of like part of the beauty of the education industry, because we have to be all of it. All of us are very passionate. All of us are doing the best we can, but that doesn't mean that everything is going to be beauty and perfectly every time, right? There's always challenges that we need to overcome. So this is one challenge. I identify one challenge. So what am I going to do? But I still don't. I'm still wondering. I'm still like, okay, yeah, I get it. Okay, now I have more students, but I'm wondering, but how is it I have more students now? How is it I have more younger students now? What's going on? What could have changed that I am having more younger students nowadays compared to previous times?
You're getting old.
Okay.
Maybe the unemployment is up, or maybe people, young students can't find work, so more of them are enrolling right now.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty good. So
Lee on the chat says maybe you guys did some advertising directly to high schools, and that got more students in.
Guys, it looks like you were with me yesterday when I was putting together the exercise, because here's the thing. So what happened in my exercise is that suddenly I remember 1 year ago, I connected with my program chair, with my dean, and we pay a visit to Maureen Rubalcaba, and we told her that we needed more advertising in high school. And she agreed to do that. She said, okay, I'm going to go to the high school. I'm going to start, trying to connect more students from high schools to your particular class. So it seems like that really worked, because now I have more young students. Now, for the next question, remember, I previously hit a wall because I didn't understand what was going on with Latino students. I was not able to find a way, an explanation for that. So my next question is, because I just don't want to let that go. I'm wondering, okay, could this somehow be connected to my other findings? Could this getting more young students somehow be connected to the fact that I also, Latino students are also underperforming? So any thoughts on that?
Hi everyone, it's Ingrid. Pedagogically, there's been discussion that Latino students really enjoy group work and project work, and if your class is heavy on multiple choice assessments or like individual assessments, it may not be a good, it might not be as interesting to them. So there's that aspect that could be happening. There might be a pedagogical aspect.
All right, thank you for sharing that. I also see that Mary in the chat is saying, maybe are you suggesting that the new students are also Latino? For the sake of this example, that's what I did. So here is my explanation. It is a very, very good point, Ingrid. My explanation to this particular example is, okay, Maureen went to the high schools, but then I also remember Maureen went to high schools in neighborhoods that were neighborhoods with a lot of Latino presence. So all the new young students happen to also be Latino students. But given that looking at my data, I saw that I was not struggling with Latino students, but I have always struggled with younger students. It seems to me that the story here is about young students. It's not about Latinos. The new young students just happen to be Latinos. But the main thing happening here is them being young, me not being able to connect with young students. And this is totally arguable. There's a lot of things going on, for sure. But let's say that for this example, that is my conclusion. So now that I found that, I'm like, okay, now I feel good, because I get what's going on. But that doesn't mean that I have the answer to the main question. What is the main question? Well, Okay, yeah. Now you know how you got to this place. But the question is, why is that younger students are underperforming? And say, did I go? Maybe I read a couple of journals. Maybe I read a couple of books. And there's very, very interesting things about the topic. But I don't know. They just don't convince me. I don't feel good with the answers. I'm like, I don't know. I don't feel about that. I don't think I entirely get that. So I even go to other faculty members, and the other faculty members, when I ask them, hey, how, are you struggling to connect with your younger students? Probably what the faculty members are going to tell me based on the data, what is? So let me just rephrase that. I'm trying to get advice for my particular problem, and then I go to other faculty members and I ask them, so how do you how do you work with young students? Because they are very problematic. I am struggling with them a lot. So what do you think the faculty members would tell me? It seems like they wouldn't tell me anything.
Well, maybe to Ingrid's point, they would tell you that, they do a lot more group work. I mean, this is where the reflective questions are so important with the data piece, right? Because now we have isolated a piece of data, but now we have to use all those reflective questions to kind of figure out what we're going to do with that isolated piece of data.
Yeah, and it could also be, again, pedagogical, where the students are used to kind of interacting with the new material and the lessons with technology tools like Google Drive and Spark. And, they're used to making Google Slides and doing presentations and more performance-based assessment than they are, again, multiple choice or fill in the blank or something like that. So it could be the students. I mean, if you see what students are doing in high school, even before going online, there's these new learning management systems. They almost look like Facebook, and the students are interacting and doing their homework and setting up science experiments in groups, but they're using these really cool tools online. And if we're not using that, we're kind of using, the old school textbook, and then, write a little essay or something, and it's not interactive and collaborative, then they're going to be like, what am I doing here?
I'm very happy that you brought that up, because for my example, I kind of came up with something related to what you mentioned. Let me show to you. Okay. Again, I'm going to stretch this example too far. All right. But let's say that I read journals, I read books, I asked faculty around, and it seems like I am not able to find the Holy Grail. I'm just not getting there. I just cannot find an explanation of what's going on. So what I do is that I decide to ask a couple of my students. I go and maybe call or maybe just run into one of my students, one of the younger students that were not able to succeed in the class. I have them in front of me and I ask them, why were you not able to get an A, B, C, or D in my class? What happened? Can you tell me? And so I asked this to the student, and this is something that is based in a real story that happened to me. Well, not me being a faculty member, but somehow related. So let's say that I asked my student, so what happened? And my student tells me, Jesus, I think you're a very good teacher. I really enjoyed the class. I really like statistics. Everything is super, super cool. But the only problem that I had, or the main problem that I had, is that you kept wanting us to use that, I don't want to say the word, software. That platform, that RStudio thing, you wanted us to use it to solve all the statistics problems. And I hate that software because you need to code everything. You need to build syntax. You need to build scripts. It's not very friendly. It doesn't help me. So instead of studying for my statistic test, I first needed to learn how to use your program. And all the time that I could have spent studying for my test, I ended up spending it learning or understanding how to use your program. And then me as a teacher, I'm like, oh, really? Okay. And then I go to another student, again, another young student from the ones that were not able to succeed in a class, and the student tells me something similar, and then a third student told me something similar. And then I'm like, okay, I'm going to change the approach. I'm going to go and visit, or not visit, maybe call, or maybe just try to find one of the older students that succeed in my class. And when I ask my student, and maybe my student is, say that maybe the student is 60 years old, and I ask the person specifically, I mentioned, hey, do you have any trouble using the platform that I told you to use, the RStudio? And the student tells me, no, because back in the 90s, that was the only thing that we were using. We were programming all the programs, we were coding, we were building syntax. So for me, that was pretty much the same thing that I'm very used to do. So no, it was pretty simple. And then I asked another older student, and the student says the same, and then a third one, and it says the same. So I'm like, okay, Eureka, now I know what happened. So now what I need to do as a faculty member, I need to determine if whether I remove this program from my class, or I provide more resources for students so that they can understand how to use this. And that's it. So that's the end of the story. That's how you would go from the very, very first data sheet all the way to finding something that really is going to make you make any kind of change in your classroom.
So you're the only instructor that uses this program then?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And
So
actually,
Oh, Jesus, if this was something that as they went through and they found out, this is what they wanted to do, then we could help them track it the next semester to kind of see if that really was the issue or wasn't the issue, and we can kind of verify that with them, right?
Yeah, and actually the meetings that we're going to have during June, which is when we're going to start talking about the action plan, that's going to be, that's going to be the topic. Now that I know what I want to do, okay, how am I going to make sure to track that in the right way? Or what are going to be the challenges for me, the challenges that I'm going to have to track that kind of information? So that's going to be what's coming next. So now that you finally decided what you want to do, okay, how am I going to make sure that that's really having an impact or not? I was going to tell you that, yeah, for this particular example, you would have been the only faculty using this particular software, or at least the only faculty with young students that were using this software. And the reason why I wanted to pick this one is because, at least in my experience, every time in every place that I have worked, I have seen how employees that are a little older, they usually don't struggle that much. At least in the statistics, they usually don't struggle using syntax and coding as young employees struggle, just because young employees are very used to use point and click software, like very friendly software, whereas older students, they are more likely to, be people that started working in the 90s, in the 80s, and that was the only thing that was back there. So for them, it's like, well, yeah, I'm used to do that. So I would like to, hear your comments. If any of you have any final comments, I don't know, whatever you want to tell before we jump to the next topic.
So Jesus,
Yep.
as someone who coordinates training, it almost sounds like the program, the discipline, the program chair could help out by providing training to this teacher, this instructor, and saying, hey, just so you know, in our industry, we're now using these new types of teaching tools, or we're using these new types of software. And then the program chair could provide some leadership to make sure there's professional development and training for the faculty to learn these new tools and how to design and use them either in a campus environment or an online environment, right? Because then suddenly this instructor who's been doing things a certain way for 5 or 10 years or more, they're being asked to change their entire pedagogy and instructional approach, which takes time. There's a learning curve. And then, you want to make sure that if they're going to make these changes, that the learning curve is moving in the right direction so that that software is going to be around, the publisher is going to be using it, It won't be sold or purchased by another big publisher. So I can see where this exercise could take us down a path that involves the entire discipline or the entire program, and the program chair leadership and professional development coordinator and trainers. So is that where we're going with that?
Can I answer that, Jesus?
Yeah, sure.
You know, it's a good point, Ingrid. You're right. The only thing I would say is that if the rest of your department has been using this, in this particular example, if the rest of the department had been using a particular software and you have one instructor that hadn't really gotten on board, of course we could include any type of professional development and any of our grants to help with that. But it could be an institutional problem or a programmatic issue where we do need to do more training, and that's what we have those funds to do with.
Well, and I know like at our CTE, that's why we have a couple advisory group meetings a year. That's why I go to a monthly meeting with industry. So we're really seeing those trends and what's changing so we can adapt much closer to industry on CTE, on our trade, because our trade is changing so rapidly. So, you know, we're not teaching people to fix what was already built. We're teaching to fix what will be built. So we're really having to constantly move on that, many times ahead of what the book manufacturers are.
All right. Okay, so here are my 2 cents about this. Yeah, the one thing that I was going to say, these are my 2 cents about this particular topic. It would be very important to think, yes, and that is going to be part of the conversations probably that we're going to have once we get to the action plan piece, which is, okay, what is the impact of making a change like this? Is maybe it's not only to my class. Going back to my example, this is the thing. This particular software that I'm telling you about, the R Studio, actually, yeah, younger students might not enjoy it as much, but it is actually one of the most used software at this point for the statistic world, meaning that you need to think, okay, so yeah, maybe young students, they do not enjoy using this, but I'm not sure if, you know, we should make a change, because one, if we make a change and use one of those more friendly software, that is not what they are going to be using outside of the classroom. So I'm not really doing any good to them if I change the software. And on the other hand, say that we decide to change the software. Well, now the problem maybe is going to be with the older students that are used to this kind of software. So you need to think a little about that. And I think that's going to be very, very engaging conversations that we're going to need to have once we get to the action plan piece, because yes, I have successfully identified things that I want to change, but what is the impact about that, right? So is it something that I can change just in my classroom, or is it something I need to have a discussion with some people outside of the classroom? So I really thank you, both of you, for pointing that out. I think that's a very valid point. Okay.
Yeah, Jesus, if I may, that I just want to piggyback on your one comment. For example, in some of my ESL classes, my students will say, hey, I'm really good with using my phone. I know how to text. I can do email on my phone. And I'm saying, yeah, but you need to learn to do word processing, because the better jobs require word processing. Higher paying jobs require you to learn either Google Docs or Microsoft Word or both. And it is a learning curve. And that's why you're here. Is in ESL, we start using those 2 software so you could, when you go to English composition in academia or your new employer, whatever that is, you're going to have that on your resume. You can use those word processing software. So I see both points, like where I see some students come into my class and somehow they got through high school without learning how to do word processing. And I'm like, okay, well, welcome to school. Let's learn that now. So yeah, so you have to be smart about it. Like Brian said, you have to be in touch with the industry, be in touch with what the jobs are looking for. So yeah, it's a complex process that we're doing here.
Yeah, I think it's a very complex process, because I just thinking of myself, I'm pretty sure if I was a faculty member I have not been a faculty member ever, but I'm pretty sure that if I was a faculty member and this was my first year teaching classes, I would be ready to change the software just because my students were not able to use it without even considering all the things that you're mentioning. So I think that that's part of the things that come only with experience, right? Like, okay, understanding that sometimes it's not only, you need to look a little further than, oh, this is going to help my students. You need to really think, okay, yeah, but how is this really going to impact them tomorrow? What are all the other pieces that you need to consider? So I think that's where it's really, really good to have people that has a lot of experience teaching that can really look for those things that some people might not really be aware of.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you. All right, everyone. So I'm going to switch gears. Just before I jump to this one, just wanted to mention again, I know that maybe your data is not as UEC, maybe your group, maybe the differences between your groups are not that dramatic. Maybe some of you are struggling with that because you didn't get, your CRNs, they have very, very few students and stuff like that. We do get all of that, but just wanted to point out, giving you an example of what is the kind of analysis that you could do with the data that we have provided so far. So this is just one way to do it. Feel free to do it in a different way. Feel free to also combine pieces of data from other places. That's totally valid. But this was just a way to show you, kind of giving you an example. Now, let me just talk to you quickly about the one-on-one support meetings that we will be hosting next week. So these meetings will be available on the Canvas shell. And hold on. And I just included the link to the spreadsheet where you can register on the chat. So you could either use that link or you could either go to the Canvas shell and click onto that link. I wanted to say thank you to Ingrid because she gave me this great idea of using registration sheets for the one-on-one meetings. I think that's going to be very helpful. Thank you, Ingrid. And these meetings are going to be 30-minute meetings. The topic, could be about the files that you receive. Maybe you want to talk about a particular file that you don't know how to open, how to use. Okay, Aaron just told me that the sheet is view only, so I'm going to have to change that. Sorry about that, guys. Maybe you want to talk about how to use the data, how to interpret the data, how to fill your online form. So there's not like a specific topic for the meetings. This is just 30 minutes where we can talk about what's going on. And the meetings are optional, okay? If you don't have time or if you feel good, you feel that you have been making enough progress with all your projects, you don't have to be there. It's just in case you want to be there. And I'm just going to pass it on to Cassandra, and she's going to talk to you about this section number 3.
Thanks, Jesus. Let me share my screen. So first, I just want to say, is this is the kind of conversations that we've been hoping to get to. Is this helpful for everyone as we kind of talk about these things? Yes, no, maybe. Yes, good. Okay. I have a couple things before we get to the course materials. Let me see if I can just share my screen.
Let me stop sharing them.
Okay.
Okay, I think I did it already.
Yeah, thank you. Let me just pull this up. Let me check in. Can you see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So just a couple things. Jesus mentioned this is check-in 3. We've looked at the demographic data. We've looked at the data in your class, the specific data, and hopefully now you're starting to think about things you may be curious in. You're kind of trying to isolate areas that you may be curious and looking at more. I did not want to do that. Hold on, sorry about that. I'm trying to get you guys all up here so I can see you at the same time. Okay. And hopefully you're starting to kind of think about what that project could look like. So I want to take just a couple minutes to reflect on your own practices in your classroom. I really wanted to just think about this because everything has changed so drastically for so many people in the last 2 months, right? 2 months ago, you were doing one thing and now you might be doing a completely different thing, with the exception of people that were already teaching online. And I think Ingrid and Aaron were both teaching online before this. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that the case? Okay, so maybe you guys can jump in a little bit and help me out in some of these sections, because remember section 2, we were reflecting on our own student practices and, you know, how we were engaging those students. There was a couple questions in terms of talking to your peers about that, and I'm curious to know if any of you talked to your peers and what you learned about that engagement process. Did anyone have a conversation with their peers in terms of how you've been engaging students?
Actually, I talked to, the peer I talked with is Matthew Rivaldi, and we found that, I mean, we've taught actually together before, so there wasn't a whole lot of like new stuff that we learned from each other, but it was a good opportunity to kind of reinforce and talk. And even though that sometimes we're teaching the same class, that we're doing some of the things for different reasons we didn't realize. So
I'm so curious to know how you guys keep up the engagement in the online environment. Are there tools that you use, Aaron, that maybe are different than in person?
I think they're similar. In other words, like sometimes I'll teach a 6-hour Saturday class. I have to constantly be re-engaging people, because if you're sitting in the classroom for 6 hours, there's no way that anybody can sit, no one in the world really can sit through a 6-hour lecture, right? So I have those activities that keep people, you know, you're switching through different activities. You're switching through different ways of learning. And I think I'm still doing that online. It's just you do them in a slightly different way. So in other words, like really you can lecture for about 20 minutes before somebody loses. An adult learner is going to lose, you're going to lose most adult learners. So you have to build that into your online. It's even going to be worse because people are going to start tuning out earlier than that. So you just have to build in activities, you have to build in discussions, you know, you use all the functionality you can on a Zoom in order to make that work. So, you know, breakout rooms, I don't know if I answered your question or.
No, I think you did, because you're still engaging the students. You have this technology in between you. Right. So I'm curious to know if people are looking at it as a barrier, or no, we can still do breakouts on, you know, through our Canvas shells. No, we can still engage them in this way, and we just make our lectures shorter. I mean, that's kind of the piece that I know so many people are going through this process. So I'm just curious to know.
Right. Yeah. I'll try to flip as much as possible. I try to do this in class, but it seems it's not as successful in the classroom. So in other words, I'll try to record as much of the lecture as I can in less than 10-minute chunks. So in other words, if I know that there's 30 minutes of lecture that I got to do, or an hour of lecture, I try to record as much as possible of that kind of one-way lecturing type of style. And I'll pick out the material that works best for that. Say, okay, I know that this is going to be best presented as a one-way lecture. And then you chunk that up into maybe 10-minute videos so that people can break that apart in their day. But then what you're doing is, when you're online, the time that you have online is you're re-engaging and you're reinforcing hopefully what they learned in those lecture videos. And then from there, you're using an activity to reinforce that, right? So in other words, I think that online, I get a lot more buy-in from students to watch the lecture videos. Say, hey, this is some stuff that I want you to, to take a look at. Be prepared, watch that, and then be prepared, because we're going to discuss this the first thing, in this week in class.
That's awesome. That's great. Brian, did you want to say something?
Yeah, we've kind of been using a different approach, because that's really interesting how Aaron's doing it. I was listening to that. We're actually still doing a 2-hour lecture in the morning with our students, just like we did on campus, covering what they read in the chapters or what they covered, add what we have to offer as instructors over what's in the book, what's in the reading, and take discussions. We also use polling and other question activities in there. We don't break out into breakout rooms. And Sam and I are both doing this. And I mean, Sam had 3 days with perfect attendance of 35 students. I'm running, I think I had 40 students today out of my 41, 39 or 40 out of my 41. I'm getting attendance, every week, and they're staying in for the whole time, and they're actually participating or asking questions. I see it on the chat. I see it on the other. So it is, and you're right, 2 hours is a long time, and I go straight through without a break. And yet students are still there and participating. I get a lot of questions. They seem to really appreciate that connection, I think, to school, the connection to the instructor, I think, because they feel so isolated right now. So that might not be as successful when we're not locked down. But right now, that really seems to be a lifeline for a lot of my students, because I asked them and they really seem to enjoy that time every day. And Sam's had the same experience with his students, because at first he wasn't doing it and they just lit up, and participation on the online assignments also went up because the participation on the lecture. And then I also do a discussion board every week as part of my attendance. So the attendance for my classes, the Zoom meetings, and the discussion board. And sometimes it's a technical discussion. Sometimes it's what's the hardest thing you had to deal with this week. So sometimes it's a stress relief, or tell me something good that happened this week, and tell me why it was good, and then share other people to kind of build that community. So the first couple of weeks of discussion we went online was just a lot of community building with questions about what's a struggle, and it's the first one was, hey, let's dump what's really tough, and now let's look at the bright side of things. And before we went back to talking about technical things, and that seemed to really pull a lot of people together. And they're just great support. For the grade, they had to respond to at least 2 students. I had students respond to like 10, some students responded to 10 or 12 people. I mean, it was just really amazing, the support that generated. And then when we moved into technical stuff, they already had that habit of that discussion board and how that worked. So they weren't as threatened by it when we got to technical stuff.
I mean, I think it'll be really interesting to see as this progresses. Obviously, the automotive students, are different from the project management and small business students. And are these students you started with in person, or are they a new batch of students?
No,
Brett?
These are students I started with in person, and then I'm going to get a new batch of students end of the month that will all be online. So it'll be interesting to see how that is, but yet they've had that transition experience with their previous instructor. So I won't be getting any new students from non-auto students because of where my class aligns in the program.
I see.
But we have been dealing with that at our night class because they've cycled with all new online students. And again, the level of participation from the instructor has been really important. I have 2 nighttime instructors that are doing 3 meetings a week. I have 1 instructor who's doing 1 meeting a week, but she is doing a lot more chat and a lot more stuff. And she's taking a lot more online classes, and she's a lot younger. So her experience from online classes is really affecting how she's teaching the online class. So, excuse me, where we're doing a chat session for introductions, she actually used an app where the students recorded themselves for introductions and responded and created that type of stuff. She also comes from more of a K through 12 background. So she's using a lot of tools that she would use in elementary school interaction with the college students that really seem to be reacting well, and they enjoy, especially when you look at a lot of our students aren't native English speakers. So a lot of those tools they use at the elementary level really cross through some of those language barriers that online can be intimidating for. And she's making a lot of activities and different apps with that. So she's been doing some really unique stuff there that's different than the other instructors are. And it's been dealing with good retention. And also she uses the chat. So a student might ask her a chat question on a Wednesday night or a Thursday night, and she has it on her phone. She's responding back to that. And so they're really getting that support and engagement on the on the class she's teaching. Not the intro class, she's doing the breaks class. But she, so it's interesting, the different ways of communicating.
And I think as we move, go ahead, Aaron.
No, I'd say, Brian, it sounds like, no, you're doing that. I mean, you're using all those techniques that you're talking about. You're using those techniques to get people engaged and interacting in your class. We'll, like project management, we do a 3.5-hour class straight through every night. It's what I was saying is like, it's that traditional kind of sage on the stage kind of lecture where, it's one directional. It sounds like you're doing all of those, innovative things that are going to keep people engaged throughout that 2-hour session. It's great.
Well, that's great because this is all new to us in auto. So
And, you know, it's probably not going away for a while. You know, we're going to be online in the summer, and we're going to be 99% or 95% online in the fall.
We were already told we're online for the fall.
Yeah, there's some labs that will be open, but the majority of people will be online in the fall. Healthcare is one of the ones that is very difficult to put 100% online. But
well, it's just like with our SMOG requirement, because it's licensing very similar to healthcare, there's certain hands-on assessments that have to be hands-on, and they're still trying to figure out how we're going to do that.
So the other piece I wanted to ask you guys, and I'm just curious because I think Shirley brought it up in our last meeting when you went through the section 2 and you talked about student engagement, and there was the very first question that talked about what you did prior to people enrolling in the class and how you engage with them. And, you know, she brought up the fact that, well, we didn't have campus solutions of these classes that we're looking at. But I'm curious to know, campus solutions may have not been the easiest transition, but is the technology, now that we have it, is it helping you engage with your students before they get into class? And if it is, are you doing that, or how are you doing that? Anyone want? I see Lee commented that she does an introductory email to her students prior to the first day of class.
For us, Cassandra, Shirley here again, we still don't have this piece worked out. We are very excited about campus solutions, totally, but we still don't have that registration piece worked out because we still aren't completely a managed enrollment. And so when we talked, Tammy and I, we worked together, both as Institute people, we realized that that will be a great benefit if we can find out before time, because the techniques that we're doing are basically, we're pulling our own classes and then getting together who's going to go on next, so that to what class to try to meet them. So it's been a backwards way how we've tried to have pre-classroom engagement, but it's still very difficult for us.
So the opportunity is there, but the department hasn't really worked out that enrollment registration piece prior to the first day. Am I hearing you right, or did I say that incorrectly?
That is correct. In
Okay.
fact, we have a big meeting tomorrow to do that. So working at how we, especially in this environment, right? But just in general, we need to figure this out better.
So I'm looking at the chat as you're talking, Shirley, and it looks like Monica Cueva, she does an email with a video of herself welcoming people to the class. And then Lee just goes back to saying how good the students feel when they get that advance notice, you know, with some information from their instructor. Okay.
In the past, we have been trying to do social media, like introductions, and just putting it out there and saying, hey, I'm going to be doing this, please contact me, and I'm this person. And we, instead of a video, we were trying to do it that way. But yes, having the ability to send out a pre with a video and etc. Is very exciting.
And then I want, go ahead.
First off, sorry for coming so late.
Hey, Ben.
But I do want to say that for the first time, I was involved in the orientation meeting of the last class I just did, and that one started in person, and now it's finishing up online. But I did find that in the orientation, the students were so excited to come to class, and I got to actually see the students and talk to them and interact with them 2 weeks before the class even started. That actually changed my perception as far as wait until the students show up on the first night, introduce myself. It was much better to introduce myself initially 2 weeks prior to the class even starting. I find that that's something I'd be really interested in doing more, given an opportunity. So that's my take on that.
I think it's a great point. And if you look at a lot of the data the institution has pulled, it really talks about that you guys, that connection with your instructor is the most important thing. It's the reason why they keep coming back to your class again and again and again. So, you know, if they can get that in an orientation, it just gets them more excited, and they already know who they're going to be meeting in class. I wanted to jump in and ask a little bit about the student characteristics too, because that was also in section 2. And it was interesting to me as I went through the questions. I was curious to know if you, as you thought about your students, did you know as much about them as you thought you knew? And so when I went through those lists, and they asked questions like if your students are homeless or if your students are disadvantaged and all of those things. Of course, I was like, oh, this is a lot of continuing education students are this. I can see it in the data. But then I really thought, I rarely hear those stories because I'm a dean, I'm an administrator, I don't get to talk to the students as much. So I was just curious as you went through that. Of course, we all think people at San Diego Continuing Education, sometimes it's like, oh yeah, of course, check those boxes. But did you have stories in your head as you were going through thinking about those students? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. And was there areas that you wanted to know more about your students? Like as you went through that, was there areas that you're like, oh, I really should know more about that?
It's funny how much a student will open up to the instructor about homelessness, about living in their car, about getting a job and being excited getting that job because of these classes that we teach. It opens up a lot so you don't know that much initially when the student first comes in because you don't get a dossier on every student. But the more the class progresses, the more the students are likely to open up. And they open up when you as an instructor start to connect with them on a more, I wouldn't say like a completely unprofessional, personal, but professional, personal level, keeping it in the classroom, keeping it very professional, and almost bringing yourself to them in a way that they feel more at ease instead of just, oh my gosh, it's the instructor. No, he's just another person. He just has the knowledge that I want. And so when you convey that kind of a relationship with the student, they are more likely to open up to you, and you get to learn a lot more about the student than you would if you just did your lecture and sent them on their way.
So are these typically, and I'm just curious as we're going through this process, there are things that are coming up and I'm thinking about, are they more personal stories and one-on-one conversations that you find out about what's going on in their lives?
Well, it depends on the student because some students are so free to talk about what they've gone through and their experiences. I've had several students just come out and say that they're ex-cons, they're drug addicts, they've gone through AA, they've gone through NA, and this is their chance at really coming back and being a part of society and actually becoming a successful part of society. And then I've also had some that just wait until everybody leaves, and then they come and then they open up to you, on a more personal one-on-one. It's just every student's different, and that's what goes through my mind as I'm going through this stuff.
That's great. Anyone else? No. I think Ben summed it up pretty nicely. So I also wanted to transition to the section 3, which is the course materials. When they say course materials, they really just mean syllabus. That's the area that we're going to be looking at. It focuses on reflecting on your syllabus and the language surrounding it. And I feel like once you perfect a syllabus, I know how hard I know how hard faculty work on syllabuses. And once they are perfected, or you think they are perfected, you never want to change them. When I taught, I felt like, I got it to a great place and I should never have to change it again. But this really helps you kind of look at your syllabus. So when you go through this section, again, I wanted you to think about where you are, not necessarily where you want to be with respect to your syllabus. So I don't know how you guys feel comfortable doing this. You can look at your own syllabus, which I know you're probably very invested in, and sometimes it's hard to see any changes that you need to make in a syllabus, or I'm happy to pair you guys up if you want to look at other people's syllabuses. Do you guys have a preference? Or do you want to just look at your own?
I already went through this, and one thing I learned is that with all the work I did on my syllabus, as good as I thought it was, it's a total piece of crap. And
Sure
I'm really using the online opportunity to go through and really do this, and I have to get it done by the 28th when I get new students. And what was just going to be a change because I'm changing books is now really a complete change of tone. I've really added a lot of resources to my Canvas page. I've really, between doing the Canvas online training and doing this, I've really realized how bad and unfriendly it was and very authoritative and just had the facts and here's what you need to do to succeed, but very cold. So I really realized how much. So I've been looking at other syllabuses, looking at other instructor stuff that have been nice enough to share with me. And really that's something I'm working on this week is rebuilding that. I've already, as a matter of fact, we took it a step further to rebuild our auto shop policy manual to make it more friendly. So we're looking at this on a whole thing because we realize that, I mean, we're auto guys. We deal with cars. We really don't deal with feelings. It's like, here it is, fix it. You can't tough, you know. I mean, so it's really, this has been really insightful on how bad it is.
I'm sure it's not bad, but maybe, you know, you could use some improvement, right? As we all could. I was thinking about when I heard you guys talking in the beginning and sharing all the information and we were looking at the data, I was thinking about I have very limited teaching experience. It wasn't, you know, a long-term career for me, but I did teach at San Diego State for a couple of terms when I was getting my master's, and then I taught at Grossmont and Mesa. And I was thinking about my 25-year-old self when I was teaching at San Diego State and how I used that syllabus almost as a weapon against my students in a sense. Like I was so rigid and strict on that syllabus. And it was so interesting to me because now looking back and I think about working at San Diego State, you know, I taught a class on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 9:30 in the morning. I taught speech communication, which is a necessary class to graduate. And typically the people that would take that class are going to either be freshmen who are just coming in young from, you know, high school, or they're seniors who've just waited till the end because no one wants to take the dreaded speech teacher's class. And they're just, you know, I got to get it done. But either way, they've kind of, you know, figured out the college system. And it's really like, especially the freshmen, that's their job, right? That's what they're doing. They're going to school. A lot of them lived on campus, a lot of sorority girls. I mean, that's what they were doing. They weren't doing anything else except going to school. And they had kind of figured out they've obviously figured out the game, how to master the game in terms of getting into college. So you take that experience, and I tried to use that syllabus again a year later at Grossmont College, but I was teaching a night class. What is the difference between teaching an SDSU class at 9:30 in the morning with a bunch of 18-year-olds and a night class at Grossmont, you know, from 5 to 8 after work? Completely different, right? You have a completely different student body. You know, there's just so many different things. And I realized that syllabus and that rigidity would not work for those students. So I found this as we were going through this, did anyone go to the convocation, the syllabus convocation exercise? Oh, did you find that useful?
Yeah,
Shirley?
I also thought I needed to do section 3 because I had gone back and saw that April 30th, section 2 and 3 were due. So I had done section 3, but when I started this, the syllabi are something that I had been aware of even before the Dr. Porter thing. But Dr. Porter, that really turned my head thinking that instead of this being a classroom management tool, a syllabi should not be a management tool. It should be an informative document that you can engage, not something that manages people. And so I really, and I mentioned that in my section 3, that she was probably a catalyst for me doing and exploring. And since then, I actually have done a couple of visual syllabi workshops through OTAN and through a couple of other things to really understand what the difference is in both equity-minded and just being student-centric rather than being instructor-centric.
I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. That's exactly it. And so I put up this quote by Dr. Veronica Neal, just talking about that, the equity-centered syllabus and the cultural, students sharing the cultural knowledge and engaging the students. I had never looked at a syllabus that way either. So it was an eye-opener for me as well. But what this got me thinking about as I was going through this and, all these pieces is that it really, to me, it's really the adult learning principles. So, as you're engaging with adults, right, they tend to be self-directed and autonomous. They don't want something that is so rigid that they don't have a say in it, right? They have so many more life experiences than maybe your freshman at college or your younger student. And so they want to bring those experiences into the classroom, and that they have very specific goals as they go through the process. So it was something that really made me, as I was looking at the equity-centered syllabus, really made me think of the adult learning principles that that really make sense to how adults learn. And they're all different. Adults learn in so many different ways, and we have to be respectful of that. So it just made me think. It sounds like you guys are farther along on the syllabus train than I had thought. So I think that's awesome. Do you guys, again, yeah, go ahead, Shirley.
I also had a question, because what came up in a lot of my reflection so far that I filled in this section was the idea of it being an institutional tool versus being actually a tool that is used by the student. And I was just wondering if that is behind some of this as well, that, I know there should be all of the parts per se within a syllabi, but the idea of an institutional format sometimes I think is really a problem when you get into this area.
Shirley, thank you for bringing that up. So I have been asking this question myself. I know there's components that there all needs to be on the syllabus, right? There's certain components that they all need to have, but do they need to really follow this quote unquote institutional framework? Me and the VPI, Michelle Fishel, have been talking about this. I think, and I'll bring it up again, because I think that the necessary components need to be there, but really as faculty, it seems like it would be your purview as long as you're hitting those key points. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
So let me go back and ask that question again, because when me and her talked about it, she kind of was like, oh, I don't think people are really following that form anyway. And I was like, well, I'd like to, this was for my own personal, this was for my program for healthcare. I wanted to give them some more autonomy over it, but just making sure those pieces were being hit. But let me go back and ask that question again.
That'd be great.
Yeah, let me do that. I'm making myself a note. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Shirley.
Yeah, we were all kind of forced into making sure, granted, before the last accreditation, we did need to look at this as a program, right? As faculty. However, we were kind of all shoved into this, and now I've seen it. I mean, that was a point when my syllabi, I think, having taught at Palomar, I was kind of on the edge of, I think, getting to a better syllabi. But then all of a sudden, it was like this big thing just kind of dumped on it. And yes, we all looked the same now from course to course. There was unity, but it really killed, I think, a lot of the interaction that we had as faculty with our students even.
I mean, I have to be honest with you, even when I came in as a dean and I looked at the syllabuses, I was like, what is this? And I had no idea that we had this template that had to be followed. It's something that I really haven't seen in other institutions. So it is something I'm working on, because I do think the elements need to be there, but there seems to be some need for creativity in that. Okay, so it sounds like you guys are already all looking at your syllabuses. You're keeping that equity focus in mind. You're really passionate about it, which is awesome. Do you want to share your syllabuses with other people, or do you want, I could find some example syllabuses and take people's names off and send them out to the group? How do you guys want to tackle, or do you just want to look at your own? How do you want to tackle this?
I think it'd be neat to send out some example syllabuses, just take the name off or, you know, whatever, and send it. That'd be interesting.
Okay.
I like looking at other stuff because I'm a visual learner. I learn by seeing things and experiencing. It's probably why I've been in the trade, so.
Okay, let me see if I can get you guys some good examples and we can put them up on Canvas.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah. All right. That's all I have. We went over our time. We were going to try to give you guys some time back to be able to work on your syllabi. Me and Jesus can stick around to answer any questions for anybody. They want to talk about projects or data. But other than that, I hope you guys have a lovely afternoon, and we'll see you in a couple weeks to continue our check-ins.